Here I am perched in one of my favourite spots in Cornwall, on the edge of a cliff looking down at the coastline. I have taken my time to find somewhere comfortable and safe to work. I will be working mostly with watercolor, but also adding gouache and some oil pastel. I am starting by lightly sketching out the composition to get a feel for where everything will sit on the paper. In this painting I have chosen to look down so there is no horizon. Getting a balanced composition is critical, as your painting will flow much better if the main elements are in proportion and in the right position. So take your time to get this right. Don't be tempted at this stage to draw in too much detail, as you will be painting over it and you don't want to fix things too rigidly just in case you make a mistake. The main shapes and outlines are all you need before starting the painting. When embarking on the painting, I often start with warm colours and transparent washes, as they are easier to achieve on clean white paper. These warm colours I hope will underpin the painting, although most of it will be overpainted soon. I am mixing a combination of yellow ochre and alizarin crimson and varying the balance and intensity of colours as appropriate across the cliff and foreground areas. I prefer large, flat, square-edged brushes at this stage. It is important that you cover the paper quickly to get a smooth wash, so make sure you mix enough paint. The direction of your brush strokes should describe the landscape you are painting, so you try and vary the marks. You can see here that I'm throwing and splashing the paint on to get a feel for the power and energy of the landscape. You have to work quickly to avoid the washes drying on the paper before you've finished. You can see I'm blending the colours wet into wet here. The colours you see here may look very vivid, but they will be painted over and become hidden by the overpainting of other colours. Take time to look at the subject. Make sure you stretch your legs and have regular breaks. Here I mix viridian with a little yellow ochre to block in the sea colour at the top of the painting. Don't be afraid to allow the colours to mix on the paper. It's not critical at this stage that they stay separate. Once the underpainting has dried, I mix an indigo using alizarin crimson, light red and ultramarine blue. I use this to block in the areas of shadow. Notice that I leave some of the original colour showing through and again vary the intensity and mark making of the indigo to correspond with the way the cliffs and rocks are structured. Take your time to mix the colours together. It can take a lot of trial and error to get the right colour. Try and be bold and free with your brush marks. Takes practice, but this will lend the painting an immediacy. Take your time mixing before applying the colour, and again try to mix enough for the area of wash you want to tackle. Better to mix too much than have to mix the colour all over again. As you can see, I am still working broadly. Any detail that is appearing is being suggested by the loose paint marks. When you have a colour on your brush, look for other areas that it could be used. This helps harmonise the painting, knitting it all together. I am bringing some of the colour I mixed for the shadows and the rocks into the sea. I want to get a feel for how the rocks continue under the water. They don't finish at the edge of the sea, and you've got to get a sense of the rocks existing beneath the surface of the water. I've opened my box of oil pastels, and I'm going to use them to provide a subtle wax resist in small areas in preparation for another colour wash. This can help to hold onto areas that you may want to keep crisp and clear, particularly in the foreground. I'm now putting an area of much darker shadow, still an indigo, but mixed much deeper. The paint needs to be really intense for this, so not too much water. I'm using the edge and tip of the brush with flicking and splattering techniques to suggest the structure of the rock. The structure is very complex, so the mark making needs to reflect this. Think about what you're doing before you make the next mark. But try and keep the painting flowing. I'm trying to define the edges of these rocks, but also trying to keep my brush marks loose and spontaneous. When you've mixed a colour for one area, have a look around for other areas that might benefit from that colour. Again, this helps harmonise the painting. Here I am using some white gouache. This is always in my palette. I'm using it at the moment to mimic how the water is moving around and over the wet rocks. The gouache can be used on its own or mixed together with watercolor to make an opaque paint. This greatly increases the flexibility of watercolor. The sea is constantly changing, and that's something that takes quite a bit of getting used to when you're painting outside. So you've got to keep a similar frame of mind when you're painting, and keep everything moving and changing. The flat edge of the brush is really useful for making these wave type marks. And of course the splattering. I'm using a Stanley knife blade to remove some of the paint that I've just put on. I sometimes also use the blade to put paint on the paper and to scratch into the surface of the paper. I am mixing the white gouache with the watercolour paints to get an opaque colour that will sit over the areas of dark wash. By doing this, you can build up layers of colour. Keep that kitchen roll to hand. If you make a mistake, it's very easy to dab the paint off if it's still wet. Take time to step back and look at what you've done. You can see here how I put a bit of colour and light back into the shadows with some opaque washes. This is best done when those washes underneath are already dry. This means that the opaque wash over the top won't mix and muddy with the paint beneath. I'm using the oil pastels again to draw back into the painting. This is something I often do towards the end. As a finishing touch, I often use the edge of a Stanley knife blade to pick out details such as the blades of grass in the foreground.